to and from other internet sources. So, what is a grant? A grant is a conditional gift or conveyance of funds with strings attached. Now, it's important to talk about the fact that strings are attached. It's not just a gift that is given to you freely, but some strings are attached because the funder has a direction in which they want you to go. And so what happened is that the funder or the funding source identifies a problem that wants to be addressed, but they have no idea about how that problem would be addressed. So they can have a direction. So you are the one who has to design your project, and you are the one who knows how you would deliver it. So you are the one who generates the idea on how the problem will be solved. And it's important to talk about who can apply for a grant. So it can be a member of an institution or groups of members of an institution. In this case, we are talking about you creating collaborations, and it could also be institutions as well as an institution or different institution coming together to form what are called consortia. And it could also be students or groups of students. But I think it's important for us to just understand that most often when you, if you have an opportunity to apply for grants as a group, it's always better because it brings in that interdisciplinary nature that is needed for some grants. It also brings in people who will look at what the idea from different perspectives and contribute differently. And now, depending on whether it's institutions or individuals or students, most often there's supposed to be somebody who leads the research, and this is usually called the principal investigator, generally abbreviated PI. And other people in the team can be called co-investigators or co-PIs. And so most often it's important to also know that grants are not given to individuals, especially individuals who are not affiliated to institutions. Most often you have to be affiliated to some institution. And this is important with the management of the grant. I think you should understand that when you have a grant as an individual, when you're affiliated to the institution, the funding body can hold the institution accountable, even though you are the one who does a lot of the work. But now when you have a grant as an individual, you can do anything with the money, and the accountability part is kind of missing. And so at the very outset, it's important for us to distinguish between what is a grant and what a contract is. So for a grant, generally, you would have an idea that is conceived by the investigator. And unlike for a contract where the agency, like the FDA, for example, they have a project that wants to be done, but they need somebody to do it, all right? So they have a project, they bring in, you can act as a contract agent to execute the project for them. So they exercise a lot of control and direction to make sure that you are doing it in the way the project was designed and all of that, and they monitor it very closely. But unlike the case of a grant, you conceive your idea, and sometimes the agency or the funding body can support you in shaping the idea, and you are the one who does a lot of the experiments. So you have your freedom, but the agency or the funding body maintains an oversight, because at the end you have to make your reports to them, your midterm reports, your final reports. So what is the model of proposal development? Because at the end, when you are submitting a document for funding, you are submitting what is called a proposal. So the first thing is to have an idea, right? And the idea has to be matched with the goals of your organization. If you're in a university, for example, we know that the goals of a university generally are teaching, research, and service to the community. So you want to make sure that whatever you are doing is in line with the goals of your organization. And the next thing you want to do is to assess your capability. There is a good grant out there, there's a lot of money, but you want to make sure that you have the ability to do what is expected of you, because it will not make sense if you write a grant and then you are not able to show that you have the capacity to do it. Now, if for some reason you are able to dodge and go through. How will you do the execution? So it's important that you assess your capability. And then you assess the needs of the idea. You have a very good idea, but what can you do to build on that idea? What data can you bring into that idea to be able to show that clearly this idea is a good one and is worth funding? And then you select your funding source, you plan your proposal writing, and planning is very important. And I think we will talk about it a little more in the course of the presentation. You plan, you write, and then sometimes you have to rewrite and you submit. Now, before you write a proposal, there has to be what is called a request for proposal or a notice of funding availability. And this is what is usually called a call. So a call for applications. Now, when there is a call for application, it's important for you to answer some questions before you are able to generate a proposal. Now, the first thing is, what is the purpose of this call? Because that one gives you a direction about what the funding body is looking for. Remember, we have talked about the fact that a grant is a conditional gift, and the condition is that you have to take it in a direction in which the funder wants. And you need to assess whether the call is compatible with your mission and purpose. I've already talked about the fact that if I in a university, for example, the purpose is teaching, research, and service. If you are in an NGO, for example, what is the purpose of your organization? What is the mission? Is it aligning with the call for proposals? And then you ask, are we eligible? If not, sometimes you would be eligible, sometimes you will not be eligible. But if you are not eligible, that doesn't close the door. You could also be able to collaborate with another person or another organization. And then you also need to add to ask whether there is what is the deadline for submission. In some cases, you have what is letter of intent, LOI, like I put it there, or also call an expression of interest. And this is what is called a pre-proposal. So generally what you do is that you submit your idea, the funding body assesses it, and then they ask you to develop a final proposal. So you need to check the deadline for the submission of all of these documents, whether there is a pre-proposal and whether there's a final proposal, and make sure that you work with the deadlines. So what are the steps of proposal writing? The first thing is that you need to have a good idea. Idea is very important. And I think we'll see some things about what a good idea will look like. There has to be an institutional fit. I've already talked about the need for your idea to align with the goals of your institution. And then you need to assemble a winning team. The important thing about grant writing is that you have to understand that collaboration and networking are very important. And now you have your idea, you see that you have a good fit, you have brought up a good thing, but you also need to match the idea with that of the sponsor. The sponsor also have their goals, whether it's Wellcome Trust, for example, whether it's the NIH research grants, for example. So you need to make sure that your idea is matching the goals and the mission of the sponsor. You have to read the guidelines very carefully and read them again and understand them. And then sometimes you need to contact the sponsor. Sometimes you need to contact the sponsor. Sometimes you need to contact the program officer, and they could also help you to be able to develop your ideas. You need to be able to plan in detail. And I'm putting planning because it's very important. So plan very well. What are the ideas that you want to execute? How will you execute it? So all of these things are very important. And then you also need to develop a budget from the detailed plan. Now, it's important to plan in detail and talk about the steps that you will need to achieve the goal of your work, because it's important to plan in detail, because that one will tell you how much money you would need. And so read the guidelines I already talked about. And when you are reading the guidelines, you are developing your story on how you're going to write your proposal. And the truth is that sometimes you can take a lot of time, do a lot of the planning, put everything together and submit, but it doesn't work. But what you need to do is that you need to be persistent. And sometimes you have to revise and resubmit. And one thing is that even though you lose, you submit a proposal and it doesn't work, you're rejected, the process is never wasted. And so One of the things I learned from Prof. Chongwa, who used to be HOD at the University of Boya, he says, you cannot get a grant unless you write one. And so even if you don't get it, sometimes it's just fulfilling to you as a researcher that you are able to start something. When you lose, it tells you that you need to refocus your thoughts. And then sometimes what happens is that when you're rejected, the reviewers will tell you why you were rejected. And so when you have the comments from the reviewers, you can be able to develop a stronger proposal, which you can submit again. And even if it fails, the truth is that the more you get it revised, you're getting something mistake of all. The proposal not to read at all. So if you cannot get it. And so what you need to do is that, like I said before, even though you have failed before, it should not limit you. You should still go ahead and write and submit. Now, what are the keys to success? The first thing is that you to have an idea that is creative and innovative. So what happens is that looking for solutions to problems, but the thing is that what are you bringing in that is new?
Please be patient. Probably his network is in the challenge, and soon he will be on board. Thank you.
Can you hear me, Eric? I think there is some interruption somewhere.
Yes, I can get you now.
You see my slides? Share them.
No, we are not in your slides, please.
Okay, let me reshare. Sorry. I think it should be okay now, right?
Yes, yes.
All right. So I was talking about the keys to our thing is idea that creative and innovative. You don't just want to do. You don't just want to do what is called a new research, but you're bringing in something new. And then the next thing is collaboration. And so who is executing the idea that you have in mind? What are their competencies? And I said that collaboration is very important because sometimes you can have an idea, but when you bring in somebody who may not be in the same field like you, they're able to look at that idea from a different angle and it strengthens, it gives more power to the idea actually. And so sometimes it's also important that you have pilot data. Now, pilot data will provide a good foundation for you to go in the direction you want to go, but it also de-risks the process. Now, the truth is that the funder has a problem, but they don't know how to be able to solve it. And so sometimes what happens is that you can have big money to write a grant and you have very good idea would be helpful. And then in some cases, it's also important to call the program officer. And some studies have shown that most grant seekers who contact the program officers end up being successful with their applications. And so with this in mind, how do you get started? The first thing is that at the beginning of your grant writing career, or let me put it, your grant writing endeavors or pursuit, the first thing is that you need to be able to start small and build a track record. Why is it important to start small? It's important to start small because the funders can be able to trust you with big money if you have been able to manage small money. And so what you need to do is that you need to look for grants around. Maybe sometimes the institutions have their grants. Sometimes you can apply for supplementary grants from bodies like the National Science Foundation, new investigator programs, all of those small grants, not very big money. Then you start with those ones, you build a track record. Now, when you're submitting for bigger grants, you're able to tell the funder that, okay, I've had these grants before and I've been able to manage them. And it's important that you play by the rules. The very first thing that I've insisted is the important to follow the guidelines. So get the guidelines, because each call will come with the guidelines in the direction on how the funder wants you to go. So get the guidelines, read them and understand them, and then follow them as much as possible. And in following the guidelines, you need to be able to follow them exactly the way they are. Sometimes what happens is that for a call, you have a template document, or they tell you that, okay, these are the sections that need to be in your proposal. And I think we'll see some of the sections in the course of the presentation. So you have to make sure that in writing your proposal, all of the sections that are required by the funder are available. What are the formatting restrictions? Sometimes the funder will tell you that, okay, write with font size 12, for example, the font type Times New Roman, or all of those things. So the first thing is that you need to be able to follow all of the format restrictions. And then you need to also make sure that the topic that you are developing your proposal in aligns with what is in the guideline, right? The funder can tell you that, okay, we want proposals on the risk factors for a particular disease, for example, the gender aspect of a particular disease. So you make sure that your topic is aligning with what the funder wants. And then you use the headings that corresponds with the guidelines. So the funder has guidelines on the topics which will fall with the different sections. So use their headings. Don't go and create yours, even though they may be similar, but you want to make sure that you use their headings as much as possible. And it's important to just say that sometimes when you submit a grant, the funders are looking at, you will have what is called a gatekeeper, and the gatekeeper will assess the documents before it even goes to the reviewers. And the gatekeeper is checking for technicalities, like what is the format? Are you aligning with the format? And you can be knocked out of a review process just because your format is wrong. So it's important that as much as possible, you follow the guidelines of the funding body. So you have decided to write your grant application, you've assembled your team. Now, it's important that we talk about the part of a grant application. The first thing is that most often you need to have a cover page with the title, and title is highlighted there because you would see that it's also very important. The title will help to guide the funding body about which reviewer is best suited for reviewing your application. You need to have a table of contents because it also helps the reviewer to navigate your documents easily. Most often you have an abstract, or you have what is called a summary, right? And a summary is the abstract or summary is everything. So it covers the different sections in your guidelines. So just like its name, is actually a summary. And then you have a problem of need or need statement. So what problem do you want to solve? That's also very important. What are the goals and the objectives of your work? There's a methodology section. So you have your objectives, but the methodology will tell you how you intend to go about achieving your objectives. And then the quality of your personnel. Who are you bringing into the grant to make sure that the goals of your work are attained at the end? So it's also very important. I think I talked about the fact that in developing your grant proposal, collaboration is very important because you need to be able to bring people into your team who will be able to do the work. And so you also need to show criteria. How will you evaluate success of your work? How will you monitor the work? How will you disseminate the work? You have done some very good work. So in this case, you can talk about your publications, the conferences, how you can go back to the community and even share the results with them. You also need to talk about the references that you use. Now, the references are also very important because it helps you to develop a good story. If you are writing anything on health, for example, a very key reference that you need to cite is data from the WHO, for example, data from the CDC. If you are working on foods, for example, it's important to reference the Food and Agricultural Organization. So references are also very important. And then you also need to have a budget and a budget narrative. We'll talk about some of this. So the budget, an estimate of the things you need, and then the budget narrative will give a justification. And then sometimes you need to bring in the curriculum vitae of the people who are doing the work, and then other appendices, like, okay, maybe a letter of institutional support from the institution you're working with, letter of collaboration from different people that you intend to also work with. And then sometimes you have certifications, you have, in the case of clinical trials, for example, you also need to bring in insurance documents. And so let's talk about these different parts of the proposal. The title, very important. And I've talked about the fact that the title is important because it conveys what the project is all about. And so what you want to do with the title is that you want to make it as informative as possible, but you also don't want to make it very lengthy. I said before, the title is used to assign your work to a particular review group. The abstract or the project summary. So it's important that it should be able to stand alone. Standing alone means that somebody who looks at your abstract should be able to have an understanding, at least a vivid understanding of what the project is all about. And so you should understand that in some cases, what happens is that the reviewer reads only your abstract. They don't need to go into the details. Now, in my interactions with some teams on grant proposal writing, some reviewers will tell you that if they read your abstract and they see maybe three grammatical errors or three spelling errors, for example, you are knocked out already. And so it's important that your abstract stands alone, but you also want to make sure that your abstract is as informative as possible and is void of any errors that can be reasons for you to knock out. It should be of publishable quality. So this one just talks about the fact that you should have an abstract or a summary that is very high quality. It should be clear. It should be short. Most often it's one page and a single line spacing. And so you want to avoid using the first person pronouns like I and we and all of that. And then you don't make references to the proposal in the abstract. Like, okay, you're writing something and then you say, this is expatiated in the proposal. So you don't make reference to the whole proposal in the abstract. And then you also want to make sure that you have covered the key elements. So the key element that we're talking about here in this case is there should be a background. There should be the background should clearly build onto the problem, the objectives of your work, the methodology, the expected outcomes, and the impacts. And then you can also talk about the budget and how your work is aligning with the goals of the funder. And so, problem statement. So the key thing with the problem statement is that you want to make sure that right from the beginning, you capture your reviewer. And this is an example of a problem statement. So let me just read. The house should about growing numbers of children in Cameroon exhibiting violent and disruptive behavior or externalizing behavior beyond the occasional incident of the occasional minor incident typical of most children during the normal course of development. Such behavior has become one of the most pressing issues in school. So this is where you hit it, the red statement. And so you want to make sure that whoever is reading your work, right from the beginning, they are captured as much as possible. This is just a repetition. And so how do you organize your need statement? So the first thing is that you want to go from a foundational statement, which is very broad. Eric, I think my internet got disconnected again.
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry about that. Can you see the slides now?
Yes, we can see the slides now.
Okay. So I was talking about how you organize your need statement. So the first thing is that you build from a foundation, you go from a foundational statement and you build your case with data. Now you build your case with data by sometimes stating numbers, right? If you are dealing with maybe health, for example, you want to talk about the number of people who are suffering from a particular disease. You also want to talk sometimes, even if you look at malaria data, for example, sometimes you have information like a child dies from malaria every 20 seconds, for example. So you want to build your case with data. You follow the guidelines as much as possible. And then you also want to be short but persuasive. And then you want to tell a story. And then you build your case in a way that leads into your project goals and your objectives. So you develop your need statement and then you build it in a way that leads to your project goals and your objectives. We'll talk about the goals and the objectives. So the goals and the objectives, like I said before, they build logically from your statement of need. And the goal generally will convey what you want to do in the project. I think we'll see some examples of how a goal will look like. And so the goal is a concise statement of the whole purpose of the project. What do you want to do in the project? And sometimes it's called the overall objective. And so you will most often see statements like the overall objective of this project is to, the main goal of the project is to, so you have statements like, and then most often you have to know that the goal is what happens after the life of the project. So after the life of the project, you can be able to go back into the project and evaluate whether the goal was actually successful. But the objectives are what generally happens during the project. And so you have the objectives, which are sometimes called the specific objectives, which are actually time posts to, or time, or how do we call it, work packages that you want to accomplish in the course of the project. So with your research objectives, one of the things you want to do is that you want to generate new knowledge, you want to test new hypotheses, or answer new research questions. And so generally they are short statements. You have examples like to determine the impact of sheep ranching on wild puma population in Peru, for example. And so you have very short statements, and most often you have to number them, as well as you have to begin with two, right? In this case, I didn't begin with two, but you have to number them, and you have to make sure that they are short, they are succinct. And so sometimes you also have to align them with what I call the right objectives. So specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. Now, when you have your objectives, the next thing that you want to do is that you need to develop methods or project design or plan of action to be able to attain your objectives. So the methodology is generally the most lengthy or detailed section of your proposal. And then, so in the methodology, you are outlining the activities that you want to do to be able to attain the objectives of your work. And so you want to make sure that the methodology is arranged according to your specific objective. You cannot have three objectives, and then maybe the first part of your methodology is how is outlining the activities for specific objective 3, for example. So the methodology should be arranged according to your specific objectives. And so it should be task oriented, so and specific and detailed, but you don't want to make it too lengthy, even though it's a detailed part of your project. You also want to make sure that you are within the limit of what is requested by the funder. And you want to demonstrate all the necessary steps of the project. You want to make sure that whoever is reading the work has an understanding that you know what you intend to do and how you would go about it. And so, like I said before, it's necessary to flow from one step to the other logically in a manner that makes sense. So you also want to question whether your methodology is new, or if it's new, or what are you bringing in is new, and why is it better than what was done before? And then you also want to, in your methodology, talk about your research design. Are you doing a cross-sectional study? Are you doing a longitudinal study? And you also want to explain why the research design is particularly important in your own case, why you are choosing a specific research design. And you want to describe the variables that you're going to be measuring. And if you have many variables, how are the variables related? Sometimes you want to define the important terms, and you want to talk about the sources, the subject that you are going to work with. If you're working with a particular population, why did you choose that population? Why is that particular population suited for your study? You also want to talk about the sample size, and sometimes it's also important to show how you calculated the sample size. What are the instruments that you're going to use to measure your data? If you are doing questionnaires, for example, are you going to use paper-based questionnaires? Are you going to use online based questionnaires? Are you going to use online platforms like I think Redcap and ODK, for example, which I'm not very versed with? But you also want to make sure that there is a step-by-step work plan like I talked about. And so in designing your methodology, there are important questions that you want to ask. As the reader walks through the project, they should be able to understand how your activities would be conducted. When would you conduct the activities? How long would it take for the work to be done? Who is doing the work? Where would the work be done? What are the facilities? And so those are important things that you need to put in your proposal. And then let's just talk about the budget. Now, the budget is the financial proposal that reflects the work that needs to be done. Now, you have your objectives, which will tell you about the activities that need to be done. But now the activities will require some financial aspect. And so the budget will explain how you intend to fund these activities. And so it aligns the expected project cost in detail. If you have to go for field work, for example, how many people are you taking to the field? What is their per diem? If you are going for blood sample collection, for example, how many tubes are you buying? What is the cost and all of that? And so it should be a mirror of the project description. And so it's an estimate. It doesn't have to be something that is exact, but at least from the perspective of the research, from you who is the researcher, that's the best estimate of what you need to be able to execute the project. It's important to say that even though sometimes you have very good budgets, sometimes you can overshoot. You can have a budget that is below or above what you need to execute the project. And in both cases, if you have a funder that is very strict, they can disqualify you based on the fact that you have a budget that goes either too low or either too high. Because the truth is that the amount of money that you have will determine the scope of the work that you can execute. So you want to prepare a very detailed budget. And sometimes what happens is that some funders will tell you that, okay, group your budget into maybe consumables, personnel cost, equipment, and all of that. And so even as much as the funders will want you to provide what are called lump sums, so you have budget heads and just lump sums. You don't break it down into the specifics. So sometimes some funders will just want this, but sometimes some funders will want very detailed budget. You itemizing everything that even for funders that ask for lump sums of the budget, you just want to prepare a detailed budget in case somebody needs it. And so the things what if I have an equipment in my project, for example, you want to show clearly that the project and the indirect costs. The direct cost is what you see in you can have, like, okay, you have salaries, you have consumables, you have equipment attributed to the project that is properly executed. But you also have costs, and sometimes they are also called facilities and administrative expenses. And so these are expenses that are incurred by your institution because they are supporting your project. And so generally it's you 10, some will ask for 15. And this is money that will go for, let's say, electricity, for example. It will go for water and all of that. So these are things that are not directly attributed to your project, but somehow you need to be able to give it to the institution because the institution will incur some costs even as you execute your project. So you have developed your grant, you have made sure that all of this proposal you're done with the drafts. And sometimes the truth is that you don't have just all of that. So sometimes what you need to do is that just set a day aside, relax, away from the document, come back and look at it again. There's a need to just revise yourself, but you want someone else to look at the document. And sometimes it's important that you get to a person who will read just a few lines of the document. Now, if you have a proposal that is clear enough, somebody should be able to tell you that, okay, this is the direction in which your project is going. Editing, you have to edit for clarity. You want to edit for conciseness. You don't want the project too lengthy. The truth is that you want to make the project as short as possible, but all of the information that is needed, it's inside the document. And then you want to avoid the use of jargons. You want to avoid terms that your work is going to a reviewer who is a master in the field, but you want to avoid jargons as much as possible because sometimes the truth, even though the expectation is that the project should go to a reviewer who is an expert in the field, sometimes it can go to some other person. Now, a review panel will be made up of people from different backgrounds in some cases. So you also want to make sure that you are not too technical in the way you present the way you present your proposal. You want to avoid the use of first person pronouns as much as possible. And then you also want to make sure that there are some key things from the funder's mission or objective that you are using in your proposal. And so just to add in the direction of editing, in some cases, you also want to make sure that you are citing reference to technical documents. For example, if I'm working on the global technical strategy for malaria, I'm citing it. Now, I think that one of the things that we have all heard is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. you want to make sure that at least in some case you are making a reference to a particular sustainable development goal. If I'm working with health, for example, I know that I'm working with SDG 3. If I'm working with education, SDG 4, and all of that. So you have read documents and you are not just writing what you're. You also want to margins and all of that. So you make sure that the margins are properly used, the font size and the font types are used properly. To the page limits, you don't go beyond what is required for a particular section. You also make sure that all of the sections are inside your document. And then you want to make sure that you are sticking with the review criteria. Now, what happens is that most often when there is a call for applications, they'll also give you information on what the reviewers are going to use to review your document. So you want to make sure that the key things that are in the review criteria are also part of your document, and then they are addressed properly. And then you also want to make sure that you have checked your budget and it's balanced. The item that you have, they sum up properly. You want to make sure that the referencing, the style that is supposed to be used, you have used it. If it's numbers, make sure that you use numbers. If it's maybe the Harvard style of referencing, if it's the APA style of referencing, you want to make sure that all of those things are used. And just in the direction of referencing, I think I saw some post recently on Twitter where an author said that they missed out on one reference that was done wrongly. And so you want to make sure that you are properly in line with what the grant code talks about. So if there are forms, you make sure that you have completed all the forms that need to be filled, all of the sections like I talked about. You want to make sure that there is no spelling errors, there is no grammatical errors. And for some of us who are in the sciences, for example, you want to make sure that if you are writing scientific names, for example, you have italicized them. You are using the systematics of scientific names. And so you want to check too that words are not duplicated and all of that. And so sometimes the question is, can we go above the page limits? The answer is absolutely no. You want as much as possible. So what are the common reasons why you can write very good proposals and they fail? So the first thing is that deadlines not met. And now with deadlines, it's important to know that we are living in time. We are living in the world has so many different time zones. You can have a funder who requires that at a particular time you submit a document, and then because you are living in a time zone, you lose track of this fact, and then you are submitting at a particular time when the deadline is already passed. And in this case, I had an experience where I applied for a program in the US, and I was very relaxed. I was planning to submit on the last day, but by the time I came, I had prepared everything. It was just to click on the submit button. But when I opened the page, I realized that the submit button was no longer activated. So with deadlines particularly, I think the advice most often is that you want to submit even before one day or sometimes we scientists or people who are writing grant applications you understand that you have a lot of people who are working on grants and they want to submit at that particular end. You may have technical errors with the server and then you are not able to submit. So the advice generally is that don't wait till the deadline day before you want to submit. Sometimes it can fail because the guidelines are not followed. So it's important that you read the guidelines, you understand the guidelines, you follow them as much as possible. And sometimes you can have a proposal, but there is nothing intriguing about it. There is nothing special. The reviewer reads, but it doesn't attract their attention. And then the other. So, like we said before, a grant application is a conditional gift with strings attached. And the strings that are attached are the priorities of the funder. So you want to make sure that you are meeting their priorities as much as possible. And then sometimes it can fail because you have not completed the document. You have sections that are missing, you have sections that maybe are not properly written. And then sometimes it can just be poor literature review. And the truth is that if you review literature well, you will be able to see a problem clearly. You will be able to show that this is really a problem. And when you don't review literature properly, you are not able to come out with a strong problem or a strong statement of the problem. And then you are not able to cite authoritative bodies like the WHO, like the FAO, for example. And then it can also fail because you have written a proposal that appears beyond your capacity. So after I had the PhD, the first grant application that I submitted was an application of 400,000 British pounds. And now, when you look at it clearly, I've never managed a grant before, but I'm submitting an application that has a lot of money inside. And so generally the reviewers will be very critical because in this case, you are just a new investigator coming in. And so you have not shown enough capacity to be able to manage this kind of big grant. Sometimes it could be because the methodology is weak, the budget is unrealistic. I talked about the fact that sometimes the budget can be below or above what the funder is expecting. And the truth is that sometimes the budget, the funder gives you, okay, you can $50,000, for example. And what happens is that if there's a budget of 50,000 US dollars, I don't want to submit a proposal that has 25,000 US dollars. I want to make sure that I go close to their limit as much as possible. And then sometimes the reviewers will assess the work, they will realize that the cost is greater than the benefits. And so there's a lot of risk in this kind of work. And that's why I talked about the fact that sometimes it's important that you have some pilot data, which will help de-risk the work that you want to do. Sometimes it's just poorly written. Scientific names, for example, which is one of the things I usually insist on a lot. English is poorly written, you have spelling errors and all of that. And then you have mechanical defects, just the structure of your documents. And now let's take the case where you have been able to dodge all of these mistakes or these common errors, and you have the award. The first thing is that when you receive your notification of award, you need to work with your grant office, and they will set up an account where the money would be deposited. And so it's also important that as soon as you receive this notification, you start working with your grant office as soon as possible, because the truth is that sometimes the funder does not understand the realities on ground for money to be released to you. I think the experience we have had in some cases is that sometimes it takes a lot of time, but the funder will not understand some of these things. And so the institution is legally responsible to sponsor the actual recipient of the grant. So the money comes into most often the university account or the institutional account, but you as the the lead researcher or the principal investigator, you are the one who is held accountable to manage that money and conduct the project logically to the end. You are also responsible to write the report and sometimes maybe give progress reports and all of that. And so the truth is that when it comes to an institution like the University of Boya, for example, whatever you are buying has to be approved by the grant office. So you write your list of things that you need to buy, and then the grant office kind of approves it before the money is released to you for you to do the things that you need to do. And so, like I said before, you are responsible for meeting all the reporting deadlines. And now, the truth is that we have to understand that grant writing is a low probability game. I think data has shown that for Americans in America, the success rate is usually 25 to 33%. So out of every 100 people who submit their grants, who submit grant application, only about 25 to 33 pass. And so more than half are rejected at just the first reading, because most often the applicants, you who have submitted an application, you did not follow the directions properly, or the proposal did not match the program. So it's important that you follow instructions, and it's important that you try as much as possible to align your proposal with the objectives of the funder. Sometimes in the proposal, you even have to make a statement to show how your proposal aligns with the objectives of the funder. And so to be able to succeed in proposals, we've already talked about the fact that you need to have very good ideas, but you also need to avoid some pitfalls. And I'm going to talk about the common pitfalls that you have in grant writing. But before we talk about the pitfall, it's important that before you get into proposal writing, you start by asking yourself some questions. Now, among these questions, the first thing you want to ask yourself is, what are you passionate about? What is the problem that you want to solve, and why is the problem important? What is the existing knowledge about that particular problem? What is actually wrong in what is being done at the moment? How is your idea better? How is it new? How is it unique? How is it different? And what will it contribute to solving what will the idea contribute in solving a particular problem, and who would benefit? And so most often you want to make sure that in writing your proposal, you always have what is called the expected outcome and the impact. And sometimes we as researchers, we want to focus a lot on the academic impact, but there is also a lot of impact in the society, the impact in the community that you're working with, for example. And so let's just talk about the pitfalls that usually happen sometimes with grant writing. The first thing is that there is a poor fit. So you want to verify whether you are actually a match for the proposal. So you will study the program goals and check whether you are eligible. And sometimes you need to contact the program officer before you start the proposal. So make sure that you follow the instructions as much as possible. And so the other pitfall is the poor organization. So your proposal structure. And so you need to make sure that you have built your case in ascending the proposal into the different sections that we have talked about, from the problem statement to the purpose, the research design, who is submitting this application, your budget summary, and everything. You make sure that the structure is as much as possible. And sometimes it can fail because your argument is weak. So you are aiming at a target, but you are not shooting well. So you want to
Hello, Eric. Is Dr. Shea having trouble with his connection?
Probably, I'm sure.
Okay, I get it.
Please, let's just be patient a bit. Soon we'll come on board.
Okay.
So you want to assume that your reviewer is uninformed, but is intelligent. So what you want to do is that you want to use language that is clear. You don't want to be very verbose to the extent that your reviewer has to go and look at the dictionary before they are able to understand your proposal. And so you stick with direct statements and use active voice as much as possible. And then you avoid a lot of the jargons and acronyms that everyone who is not versed with the field won't be able to understand. And then sometimes it can fail because you are not clearly brought out your objectives and your goals. So it's important that these are clearly stated so whoever is reading the work is able to understand what you intend to do. And then it's also important that you have a plan of a research plan. So what you want to do is that you want to talk about the major tasks that will be executed in the project and when you expect this task to be executed. So you want to make sure that you use flow charts, you use calendars, Gantt charts, and all of that. And you want to make sure that all of this are in a single page. You don't want to spread them, right? So whoever is reviewing the work should be able to have a vivid understanding of the work plan and the timelines just on a single page because it gives a clearer understanding. And the pitfall number 7 is deviating from the guidelines. So we have already talked about the importance of following the guidelines. And so when you don't follow the guidelines, the common things that will happen is that you can have late submission, you can have narratives that are too long, you are going out of the format, you are missing the fonts, you're missing margins, documents are missing, budget narrative is missing, and all of that. And pitfall number 8 is that you didn't pay attention to the review criteria. Remember, I've talked about the fact that sometimes what happens is that in the call for proposal, they actually give you that, okay, this is what the reviewers are going to use to check your document. So you want to make sure that you pay good attention to the review criteria because then you can be able to write a stronger proposal. Pitfall number 9 is weak abstract. So what you want to do is that you polish your abstract. We have already talked about the fact that the abstract should reflect the entire project. You should clearly bring out the project purpose, the statement of need. And then you want to make sure that in your abstract, you talk about who would do the work, why is the work important, how would the work be accomplished, and then you want to make sure that you end by your expected outcomes and impact. And then pitfall number 10 is that you are writing alone. So what you want to make sure is that you look at somebody else who is part of the field and somebody who may not be part of the field actually, because sometimes what you do is that you just want somebody to review for grammatical errors, to review for errors with the structure, for example. And sometimes what I do is that when I write a grant application, I actually give to some of my students to look at and some other colleagues. And so what you need to do is that you don't need to feel that you are the best person in the field. So leave your ego outside, but also allow a lot of time for rewrite. And so it's very important that in your planning, you start early and then you make sure that you are giving it to colleagues and giving them enough time to read, time for you to review and for you to submit on time. And so you want to make sure that you are making use of proofreaders. There are some people in your circle, for example, who are very good at spotting errors. So this kind of people, you can give them the document to do a lot of proofreading. And sometimes the truth is that with technology, you also have a lot of AI tools that you can use to proofread your documents. And so this also helps in making your document stronger. And pitfall number 12 is that there is insufficient editing. So this goes back to talk about the importance of time. Plan ahead of time, write a document, give yourself a lot of time, and then read the document again. And so with this, what are the tips for a successful grant writing? In summary, the first thing is that you want to feed your research and grant writing into your job. Now, it's important that you feed this because as a researcher or somebody in the academia, even if you are not in the academia, you will realize that grant writing is a very important aspect of your career growth. So you also want to find mentors. These are people who have done these things before. They can work with you and point out directions in which you go that makes it better for you. And then you also want to read successful grant applications, attend workshops, find collaborators. We have already talked about the need for collaboration. Sometimes you want to get to the website of some of these funding bodies and maybe sign up to get their alerts. You want to think big, you want to think small, but you want to think different, because the key thing we have said about your research your grant application is to have an idea. Networking is also very important. Sometimes you would submit, it will not work. You need to revise and resubmit. So the last thing is that grant writing is a game. Sometimes you lose, sometimes you win. And that brings us to the end of my presentation. I know that I've been more than the 1 hour allocated, but it's also because we had a lot of interruptions with the internet. Thank you for your kind attention. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you very much, sir. It was wonderful. So please, if you have any question, just unmute yourself and you ask your question. Thank you. Or you have any contribution, you can equally add.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shey, for this presentation. I've tried to write grants several times, but I've never been successful. I feel like it's not difficult, but like you said, there's a percentage, and you must be lucky to always fall amongst the luckiest one. Well, there are a lot of things that you've mentioned today that I think are really going to help me to improve for my next grant application, because I've noticed there are some of the mistakes you highlighted that I was also doing. So I really appreciate your talk, and I would like to have the presentation at the end to go through it again and again. Most important thing, like you said, the idea you're trying to sell, it's also an important factor, because if at the end you have a very good proposal, but the idea doesn't really match what the funders want, it will still end up on a rejection. But with a good proposal, we can always apply to different if one is rejected. So I'm going to really take seriously the notes you shared today, and I think it's going to help me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for the good comment. So I would share the presentation with Eric, and I think he would be able to get the slides to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other questions, Eric?
Oh, for now, I don't have any question. I don't know if there are others with questions.
Okay.
Sorry, I have a question.
Yes, McQueen.
Yeah, thank you very much, Doc, for the wonderful presentation. So I just like to ask a question. I used to say a question about something I used to see about this application. Sometimes they say maybe female applicants are highly recommended, or so I don't know how they take this. Does it mean that if maybe they have to choose, maybe there's a position they have to take one person, they'll take the female, or what do they mean by that? What criteria do they really use to select when they say they prefer maybe more female applicants?
So I think my understanding is that if you look at the world of science, you don't have a lot of females who are principal investigators, right? So generally, the idea is that you have more males than females. So funding bodies, what they are trying to do is that they are trying to bring some gender aspects into research. And I think the key thing is just to encourage a lot more females to be part of let's say, the research process. Now, I can give you an example. I submitted a proposal recently, and what they said is that if you are creating a team, you should make sure that at least 50% of that team are females. And so the truth is that sometimes what you can do is that if you are writing a proposal and you are a male, what you want to do is that you want to incorporate as many females into your work as possible, because the funding bodies, they have their criteria when it comes to the gender aspect, and you want to make sure that as much as possible you are aligning your research proposal, even at the level of how you are composing your team with what they want. Is it clear?
Yes, Doc, it's clear. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'll ask the next question. Okay. Wagda, you
So-
wanted to say something?
Yeah, Dr. Shey, thank you for the good talk. I just wanted to add to the answer you gave to Bencho McQueen. Actually, that will also mean that in case they have people who are equal in weight, male and female, they may prefer the female. That is the summary. It means for a female, it doesn't mean you should underperform and think you'll be accepted more because you're a female. But it's that if you have an almost equal weight with a male contestant, then you will have priority. And then the other question of the team that Dr. Shey talks about comes up. If you have a macho team that is just made up of men, different from the composition of a typical population, then there may be an issue. It may already betray a lot of what is going on, of who you are.
Thank you very much, sir. It's good to see you on a platform like this.
Yeah, Dr. Shey, I have another question. It was about budget justification. Because
Yes.
they asked CSMH, I think there's a grant like that where they always ask for budget justification. When they
Yes.
say, what does that mean when they say budget justification?
Yes, I think in summary, the budget justification is why you need what you're buying, right? If like I said before, now when you are writing an application, sometimes you have what I call budget heads. Like, okay, you have salaries, you have consumables, you have equipment. Now you need to be able to say clearly why you are buying what you intend to buy. If I want to buy an ELISA plate reader, for example, I need to show clearly that an ELISA plate reader is necessary for accomplishing or for executing the project and meeting the objectives. So that's the budget justification. Sometimes it's called budget narrative. But in summary, it's why you want to buy what you have put as part of the project. If you are paying per diems, for example, why do you need to pay people who are going on the field? Normally, you want to make sure that people who are going on the field, there is something for them. It may, and sometimes what you actually have to do is that you have to follow guidelines for per diems, for example. If somebody has a PhD, you are paying them differently from somebody who has a master's and all of those things. So summary is that budget justification is why you are using the money for what you are using the money for.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe if there's no question, I wish to say something.
Okay, Prof.
The first thing is that, as we'll say in some regions of Cameroon, now find market is sell itself. So the first thing is you have to take this as a habit if you think that is what you want to be doing in the future. And that means you don't just sit and then someday you get up that you want to write a grant. There are two ways which you can approach this. Is what one of the founders of PayPal calls 0 to 1 or 1 to 1 paradigm. You may decide that you're a genius and then you come up with a very innovative idea. And that is Peter Thiel that says that. You come up with a very innovative idea and you think that you're going to go through. But chances are the number of people who can do it that way are very small. And the easiest way may be 1 to 1, which is globalization in another way. And if the global environment is your laboratory, you want to be close to people who are doing that and be able to see what they're doing, participate in the process. Maybe they're doing budgeting and you say, oh, I can help you do that, right? And you participate because the thing is, it is very easy for you to go online and see a publication, but it is pretty difficult for you to see a grant submission, right? And you definitely want opportunities to be able to see what people do and have a little bit of mentorship or coaching in that way. Because if you're going to start from scratch, it's going to be a pretty difficult situation. And with that, I come to the tools. We are in universities or environments where we don't like to use tools or we are poor in tools and practicals. Definitely, if you're going to be doing things like Gantt charts, if you're going to be doing things like budgeting, then the tools which have to be used for, some of them are even free. And so you don't want to be putting substandard things when they're already free and easy tools out there that could help you to do the things appropriately. For the budget, what Dr. Shea said, justification may also mean calculation, right? Are you just spinning off the things in your head? Or do you have maybe like a clear calculation that shows, okay, I'm going to buy 1,000 ELISA plates, or I'm going to buy this number of polymerase, that kind of stuff, right? And I'll conclude that by saying it is important for us, as I always say, even if I create enemies by saying that, it's important for us to always look at what others are doing, try to copy and rehearse the things in our minds, and always ask ourselves, what are the tools that are needed for that? Because no matter how much intelligent we are, we may be geniuses, right? Even Einstein was one, but it took some other people to take him, like Max Planck, to take him to Berlin for many things to come up. So we may be a genius, but we always need to go from that paradigm of Cameroon, where we're thinking of Francophone, Anglophone, Northwest, Southwest, Fako, Manu, Mesam, Do, and whatever. We need to go away from that paradigm and be in the tribe of scientists. And if you see someone who can hold your hand, stick on the person. And it is usually you are placed to stick to the person. It is not for the person to come to you and say, with that mindset, this is one at the same time they're applying for grants. And the reality is you're applying for grants from the white man, and in the bar, you're spreading conspiracy theories. You want to identify yourself with whom you want to be. If you want to be king of house or the bar, you stay there. If you want to progress with grant writing and stuff, you stay there and try to grow there. Because once you mix the two, it doesn't take long for one of them to betray you on the other side. So long story short, you know, if you take white money for granted, then because she say you want to keep black man.
Thank you, Dr. Babila, for the advices. It's a little bit fun, but it's good advice.
Eric, over to you, please.
So, Master Eric, before you just you just say something. So there's this story. I went to work. I'm no longer in academia, and I travel a lot. And I went to work at a certain point in Hamburg, and the groups that people submit a lot of grant applications to are found in Bonn. And I was traveling back to Bonn, and this is the reason why I said the last thing I said. Because the one thing we should notice about our environment is people using underbelly blows to succeed. So, and I was sitting there with one person who had to give some grants to Cameroon. And fortunately or unfortunately, he then asked me, do you know this person? Do you know this one? I have this grant application that I have to look into before I arrive Bonn. That is a 4-hour journey. And it's been pretty difficult because there's a lot of gossip from the ground, right? And I wouldn't call names. And this is why I'm saying you have to identify first with what you want to be. You may be a conspiracist, or you may be on the other side, and just stick to that and do your work pretty well. Because you may be joking with some people around, especially in a case like small environments of ours, where most people apply to the same bodies for grants, and you don't know what people are saying because it's typical of Black people, right? You don't know what people are saying. And we have to be very careful about that, know what we are saying where, because at times the things come back to the people who give the grants. And in this case, there were several universities in Cameroon involved, beginning from down south right up to the new ones in the north. So we have to be pretty careful. The one thing Dr. Shey said about pilot, it is pretty important, and important for two reasons. The first reason is that when you do a pilot and it works, it shows that everything you're going to project from that pilot, right, is true or is closer to the truth. And the other thing is that if you think, say, some people feel steal ideas, right, and this is pure conspiracy, it's always good to have a proof of concept and document. What you don't document has never been done. And there have been cases of people complaining that their ideas were stolen or whatnot. And so when you have a pretty good thing, maybe if there's a possibility to do a pilot, you do it and already include a small analysis like a proof of principle. A proof of principle is always good, always important, and it leverages a lot of things.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Yeah, and then my last word, most laboratories that win a lot of grants, what they do is that when they have money going on one thing towards the last year or when they are applying for the next one, because there are laboratories like in Europe that depend entirely on grants, right? So that is how they project how many people they're going to employ. And what they do usually is that, like towards the last 1 year to 6 months, they take this new idea, put 1 or 2 technicians on them, and basically try to bring up this proof of principle. So it's like piggybacking or like using steps to climb further to the next floor, right? So they basically use a present grant, even though it is not official, to try to get a proof of principle, which they then sell. Like say, okay, when I say I don't already do the one, it means say I go fit one better.
All right, thank you very much, Prof. I'm happy having you on board. And Dr. Shea, thank you so much. It was so wonderful. Before we leave, I just want to ask, can master students be given a grant, or is for some specific students, or let me say specific people researching?
Okay, maybe I would say something. I think the key thing about every grant application is that you need to be able to check clearly at the eligibility criteria, right? So in some cases, you may have grants that are specifically for maybe people who have a PhD, but in some cases you can have grants that are open to master students. Like I think recently I worked with a student from the Faculty of Agriculture and Veterinary Medicine that was applying for a grant, and he actually ended up winning the grant, and it was from I think the Cameroon One Health Society. So the work basically was around using, I think, some plant extract to see how you can improve productivity in snails or something like that. So in summary, what happens is that checking the eligibility criteria is very important, but there are grants for all levels. Even though I would not say that I've seen something for people who are still at the level of bachelors, but I think master students can conveniently win grants. There may be fewer grants that are for master students, because generally, I think there has to be you have to show your experience. But I think that there are grants for master students, even though there may be fewer.
All right, sir. Thank you very much. Please, I don't know anyone with another question. All right, if there is no question, then we come to the end of this session. Probably next week, we might be looking at another thing, which will be very, very helpful.
Okay.
So,
You
yes,
keep us,
Vanessa?
you keep us updated about the next session, the next meeting, and the topic.
All right, I will do so.
And thank you very much again, Dr. Shea, for the great talk.
Thank you,
Right.
Vanessa. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much, Prof. Babila, for being on the platform.
Thank you, Dr. Shey. I want to be a big person like you.
If I knew that you were on the platform, I would have been more careful, because anyway, thank you, Prof. Thank you, Eric.
No, but
Thanks, everyone.
I'm glad we are having this opportunity, because that is the only way we can grow.
Actually, Prof.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Right, bye.
Bye-bye.